The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. Welcome back to a new season. And my first guest this year is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. But he's got some new portfolios that he's working on, and we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. Alex, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
Now, as we're taping this, you've just come out of the first caucus meeting with your colleagues in the Conservative Party, the opposition party. We did allow you to get a short break for lunch.
Much appreciated.
But that must have been an interesting experience, because you've got a new leader who was a member of caucus before, and kind of like turning the page, isn't it?
It is. I mean, but at the same time, I think it's a continuation of all the hard work that the previous team was doing, and everything that we were doing as per what the electorate, put us in power, or not put us in power, but, elected us to do, which in this case, us being in the official opposition, is to hold the government to account, look at the legislation, make sure the legislation that's coming forth is the best legislation possible for all Canadians. And now we do have a new leader, and I think everybody's sort of pumped up. It's that feeling almost like, with back to school, that there is a huge desire and a sense of optimism in a lot of ways from at least those of us in the Conservative Party to get back to work fully in Parliament. And hopefully we're going to see that happen here in the next couple of weeks.
It's funny, because we're doing this on Skype. We're not doing this face to face, but even through Skype, I sense your energy and your excitement and your. Let's face it. It was you sound pumped.
Well, I am pumped. I'm excited to be back in the House. It's been an interesting spring, obviously, for everybody as the country dealt, and the world dealt with this global pandemic with COVID-19. And so there was some special measures obviously adopted in the House with the special committee for a number of months. Then we did have we were scheduled to have 4 accountability sessions this summer. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister chose to prorogue Parliament and shut that down, so we missed that last session. So I think everybody's keen to get back here on the 23rd and get back to sort of normal Parliament, or whatever we'll see that looks like. But I think with the economy starting to reopen, schools going back, I think there's going to be a greater desire by all parliamentarians across all the parties to sort of return to some level of normality.
Now, when you talked about returning to normality before, in our last conversation, there was a lot of, there were a lot of measures in place to protect parliamentarians and to reduce the transmission of COVID. And will you be coming back in the full House, or will you be spaced, or will you be part online, part in person? What's the plan for the?
That's a great question that we're eagerly awaiting some indications from the government. They haven't yet really provided that. I know the new House leader and the new Chief Whip, both Gerard Deltel and Blake Richards, the 2 individuals now appointed to those positions, we're expecting additional feedback from the government today. Or maybe, by tomorrow morning at the latest, on some indications. Obviously, the Speaker had released something a couple, maybe a month or 2 ago now. It's hard, time's kind of just warped here, is with respect to the numbers. So even though with the reduced quorum that all parties had agreed to back in March, to 50 being in the House, the Speaker has indicated we can safely put 86 into the chamber with the respect and the physical distancing and health protocols that have been put in place. And again, those are the same protocols we followed today under the direction of the House of Commons administration to do this. And so we successfully ran a great caucus meeting today national level caucus meeting with those increased numbers in the Sir John A. Macdonald building, but and then with the extra overflow in a couple different rooms, or those MPs that couldn't make the trip to Ottawa, they were able to Zoom in, and we did it. So it was a bit of a hybrid model that we conducted ourselves in, but the vast majority of our 121 person caucus were in person in Ottawa today. And it was just, I think you could sense that optimism and sense of, get up and go and energy, I guess, from the group, because it's when I think it's the same as any business or any sort of social interaction. With that lack of social interaction has had a huge impact. And I mean, I've talked to teachers locally, even though, education falls under the provincial jurisdiction, but, but the strain and stress that's been on our students for the last number of months due to that lack of social interaction, especially with the teenagers. So there's the mental health aspect of just getting together and being able to interact a little bit while respecting all the necessary health protocols.
It's interesting that the way you're describing it sounds very much like the kids getting back to school, that the MPs are excited and they want to get back doing the business of the country. So that's a good sign. That's a very good sign for all of us. I want to go back a little bit in time if we can, Alex, because don't worry, we'll come back to the House of Commons stuff a little later in the program. But I wanted to ask you a kind of an obvious question. What did you do all summer?
Well, we kind of continued on as per normal. I was in the constituency pretty much throughout the whole summer. And to be fair, it actually was a slower tempo than I think it would have been normally, because we had to respect that. But I mean, I was to a number of events, the ones that still happened outdoors that I was able to participate in. Did a lot of calls early, with some of the business communities, with the ag folks. That never really stopped, trying to understand those issues. Obviously, the workflow coming into the office itself was a little bit higher than normal. Obviously, I spent a bunch of time with my daughter, which was great. We even got a little bit of hay in, which I'm glad it's just a little bit. The body's not used to what it used to be able to do 20 some odd years ago. So, doing it for a couple of days.
You can't do a 14-kilometer ruck march anymore, Alex. Right?
Well, no, I could do the ruck march. I'm quite confident I'm still capable of doing things. It's just that mowing hay up in the hayloft, that's a different type of muscle and a different type of use. And I mean, part of it's just the lower back and being bent over. And even though I'm the eldest of my brothers, somehow I'm the guy that ends up in the mow when it comes haying time. So it's there was a lot of that. As I said, some time with the family, lots of just sort of getting caught up to some extent. We've got the office up and running full tilt again. We still encourage people to book appointments if they want to come through, but we've got all the safety protocols in place there so that we can, control the numbers coming in the door. So we're respecting everybody's health. And at the same time, so that's a number of things. Obviously, there were a number of meetings early on in the thing. From a caucus perspective, we met every time before there was an accountability session. So we did that in July as well. And so just looking forward to kind of getting back to some level of normality.
Well, the one thing you didn't mention, of course, is the leadership campaign that was going on. And you were involved in that, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, and true. That did occupy a little bit of my, sort of the off-duty hours, if you want to say that. Most of that was done during Zoom calls at night. From from Aaron's perspective and the other candidates' perspective. But there was a little bit of work. I mean, I did volunteer to help out with that a bit, obviously, because I was keen to see Aaron win the leadership, and so I wanted to do my part. And so I was thankful that things, even if you looked at the results locally in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, there was support for all four candidates in our riding. However, Aaron was successful, from first ballot right through to third ballot, which was what my goal was to help deliver it to him, and I'm glad it happened that way.
It was interesting to see the way it kind of fell. did you not use a proportional representation system, or what was it called? What was the way that was called? The way
every riding's weighted equally. It's exactly the same, really, as a normal federal election works, right? In that it doesn't matter who wins the most, the popular vote. If that would have been the case, we'd be in government right now, because Conservative Party and Andrew Scheer actually outperformed the Liberals in the October election from a popular vote perspective. However, they were much more efficient in their vote results, resulting in their larger number of MPs being elected. So it's the same way for a party leadership race. Every riding is worth 100 points. And so it doesn't matter. As you said, I think the riding with maybe the fewest number of Conservative members that chose to vote in the leadership was something like 51. Whereas we had over 1,141 members cast ballots in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. So we're one of the larger riding associations in Ontario. We don't quite top some of the bigger ones out west, but we do have a faithful membership that we're quite interested in casting their ballot in this race.
And technical considerations aside, because there were some technical issues at the very end of the night of the announcement, it seemed like a pretty decent and open campaign, and everyone was doing their very best. Of course, I didn't, we never see what's in behind there and the arm twisting and leverage that gets placed upon people. But hey, the people were able to vote, and that's the important part.
Yeah, the record votes, right? Over 270,000 approximately members in the party right now. Over 160,000 or almost 170,000, can't remember the exact number anymore, cast the ballots, the most that's been cast for any political party in the history of Canada in a leadership race. So that's something to, gives us optimism in our party that, that interest and more people are interested in the Conservative movement. So that's always good. And as you said, it's like any leadership race, no matter the party, there's always a little bit of divisiveness or that comes out during that. And I'm just so impressed at not only Aaron's leadership over the last couple of weeks, but all the campaign teams in the different camps, that they recognize the need for, to bring everything back together and work as a unified front. And that's been the most impressive part of it. And I'd suggest for any Canadians out there, if they didn't get a chance to listen to Aaron's victory speech, I'm fortunate enough from my military background to have been exposed to a number of very inspirational leaders and heard some pretty, exciting, inspiring speeches in my lifetime. And I was actually shocked, and I've known Aaron for over 25 years, on just the caliber of that speech he delivered after 1 a.m. in the morning, or early on that Monday morning. So it's worthwhile. I think he did shed a lot of positivity and inspiration, and a great message for all Canada.
Yeah, I think that if somebody wants to go and listen to that, I'm sure that's available somewhere on the internet by just searching his under his name or Conservative Party. Somebody's got it archived somewhere.
It's all over YouTube. It's the first thing that'll pop up if you Google Aaron O'Toole victory speech.
There you go. Now, as you move through the campaign, it has culminated, and now we've got, what shall I say, the page has been turned, to use another metaphor. But tell us about Aaron O'Toole. You've spoken very highly of him. You were classmates at RMC, I believe. So, tell people about Aaron O'Toole, because we've got to get to know him.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's actually, I think, how he opened his speech pretty much. Good morning. My name's Aaron O'Toole. So we weren't classmates. He was a couple years ahead of me at military college, but we were in what we call sister squadrons. I was in 2 squadrons, he was 3 squadrons. So we shared the same building for those my first 2 years at the college. So no, Aaron did he did 12 years in uniform, 9 years in the Reg Force as a tactical Sea King navigator. So he participated in the Swiss air disaster down down on the East Coast. He's got that practical experience in the military, serving our country, and then he went to law school down on the East Coast, and then he's became a corporate lawyer. Done a lot of pro bono work with Indigenous communities up north with different organizations. He's one of the co-founders of True Patriot Love, which is the largest military sort of supporter nonprofit charity out there now. So he's been an individual that's been dedicated to doing what he can to serve Canada, and at the same time, he's just an average. He grew up in a very much a blue-collared family. His father had worked in the automotive industry with GM, and so he grew up down in the Oshawa area although he was born in Montreal, and then since then, his father he's following a bit in his father's footsteps. His father was actually a long-term member of provincial parliament here in Ontario, so. He's got some interesting backgrounds, but I think really when you reach out to him or people listen to him, the thing that's going to most impress them is that Aaron's, there's substance to him, and he's authentic at the same time, and anybody can approach him and reach out to him. There's nothing fake about Aaron. Aaron is just who he is. I think he's a great leader. But he understands what average Canadians go through on a daily basis, and I think he's going to come up. He recognizes our job as the opposition is to hold the government to account, but at the same time, he understands that if we want to demonstrate to Canadians that we're a government in waiting, we got to come up with some solid platforms, some good policies that will resonate with Canada and all Canadians. And I think you're going to see that forthcoming. In fact, he's put a lot of it on paper. When he ran for the leadership 3 years ago and finished third to Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier, that was as a relatively new member of parliament. He had only got elected in the by-election in 2012, but his policy document was over 70 some odd pages even then, and he cut it back a little bit because he recognizes that not every person's going to want to read a 70-page document, but I think his document's still 50 pages long, and it covers pretty much every issue out there. And again, so people should really just go to aaronotoole.ca/platform, and you can read what his platform was for the leadership campaign. That doesn't mean that's the identical platform word for word that the party would run on in a national campaign, because again, the other great thing about Aaron listens to people. He listens to his own caucus. He's going to listen to, more importantly, all Canadians, and he's not afraid to modify or change or evolve a platform or a policy or an idea based on good, solid feedback. So I think that's, those are some highlights about what I think about Aaron and why I'm quite happy and impressed to see him at the helm.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, John, because Alex, because I knew his father, John O'Toole. John was not just an MPP for the riding of Durham on the east side, on the east end of Durham region, but he was also mayor of Clarington, mayor of Clarington, and also I don't think he was ever warden of or regional chair of Durham region, but certainly he would have been active at the regional political level. So if it isn't in the DNA, it's certainly a part. Aaron is certainly a descendant of a political family, that's for sure. And I did notice in the shots I saw of the when he was given the word that he had won, there was his dad right there. His dad and his mom were all right there supporting him, which was kind of good to see. It's been a long time since I've seen John, but yeah, good to see. Good to see. Now, one of the things that we are that comes up in Canadian politics, and you probably can answer this, is how will Aaron O'Toole play in Quebec? Because he's got to be bilingual. That's kind of a given. And Mr. Scheer was competent bilingual, competent in French, but Aaron's got to be able to go in and and meet the people in Quebec where they are. And it's not so much the Liberals that are the roadblock there. It's the Bloc Québécois, because that's been the way the politics have divided for decades. So do you think he has a chance to make an advance for the party in Quebec?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason Aaron won the leadership more than anything was the fact he won Quebec during the leadership race. He impressed everybody there. He impressed me. Like I knew, in fact, when Aaron first, in January, him and I had sort of a discussion, when he was sort of contemplating throwing his name into the hat again and running for the leadership. That was one of the critiques or warnings I gave him at the time. I said, hey, I haven't heard you speak a lot of French, recently. That's something you're going to have to work on, because it's something. And he's been working on it to the point where I participated, watched a number of his Zoom calls and with Quebecers. And I was shocked at not only his French, but at his comprehension. Like I like to think I can understand most of it and can get by. But there was some of the questions, and in particular, and I've seen him now performing with the French media. He understands the nuances, and he can get right to it. And even his pronunciation is way better than I ever gave him credit for. And he's to the point where our Quebec colleagues are like, wow. Like I've been in the room even, where Aaron's speaking French, and I don't look at him. I'm looking at the Quebecers in the room, the Francophones, and you can judge then, on how well he's performing. So that the language thing aside, because again, we've got some interesting examples in our Canadian history of different prime ministers and leaders, being questionable, performance in either official languages in some cases. And so I think Aaron's, he's got that forte and that competency in the language itself. But one of the things, too, that I think appealed to a lot of the conservative members in Quebec, Aaron actually had a specific platform for Quebec to address some of their concerns and issues, because they are a distinct culture, and it's been recognized, even, under the previous conservative government as a distinct nation. And so therefore, Aaron recognizes that. So I think you're going to see him do a lot better. And again, your commentary about the Bloc, I mean, it is kind of sad, and I'm not a political historian by any stretch. I'm sure you're much more up to speed. But when you look at where the Bloc came out of, in the 80s, a lot of them came from the Conservative Party, and however, under Harper, the Bloc Québécois basically ceased to exist. They were down to a few seats left, 6 seats I think left in the House of Commons, and unfortunately, since the government has changed over, that's where we've seen some of this, change, I'm trying to think, divisiveness, come into the country here a little bit, or in particular in Quebec and out west. But, the Bloc have risen up again just in the last 5 years to where they are a third-party status and have a lot of influence in the House of Commons, which, again, I have no critique against the individual MPs. A lot of them are just great people, and they're doing their best to represent their constituents. But I always question when you have a party in the House whose sort of one of their main purposes is to separate from the country, right? So so I believe Canada first. That should always be that way. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit biased towards the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound myself. However, we're all in this as a country and as a nation.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Alex, because in 2012, as I recall, that was the election of Orange Crush, when Jack Layton led the NDP and basically wiped Quebec, turned Quebec orange, and that was the result. That left the Bloc and anybody else kind of out of the picture. At the same time, it swung back into the Liberal hands in the last election. It will be always interesting to see what will happen in the next election. whenever that's going to be. And we're going to get to that in a minute, believe me. It's interesting to see that regional nature of this country and the various parties. One of the comments that has been made is that the Conservative Party currently has a strong leaning to the West and rural Ontario, which is, I think, both of them are reasonable and fair comments. Do you think that's going to cause Mr. O'Toole a bit of a challenge? Because, okay, he's got a base, but he's got to work outside his base to win the next election.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's not a hidden, secret or anything. We recognize fully as the Conservative Party that in order to form government, you have to win seats right across this nation. The Liberals have demonstrated you can form government without the West, because they basically got shut out of the West, which isn't good. Whereas we do got representation. We need more representation in the Maritimes. We need to do better in Quebec, and we need to do better in the 905. Ultimately, we fully acknowledge that your suburban parts of the country around your major urban centers are where a majority of, I think, what you call your swing voters reside. And they're the ones that ultimately will impact and affect. And I think that's one of the great things about Aaron. Aaron understands this. He's been elected or re-elected 3 times now in the Greater Toronto Area, in the exact part of the country where we need to to win more seats in order to form government. So he gets that. He understands this wholeheartedly, and he understands where we can make inroads. He's got roots, as I said, across the country. And I think, we're gonna get there. I mean, I'm optimistic.
It's interesting you mentioned his own history, because as I recall, I lived in that riding back in the 90s, and it was represented by Alex Buchanan, who was a Liberal, and then it went Conservative, and there was some rejigging of the boundaries, which actually caused that change, near as I could tell. And the minister who came in was the infamous, I believe, the minister who I'm pretty sure she was the $10 orange juice. Yeah, Bev Oda. That's the name, Bev Oda. And then Aaron won. But what's really interesting about that riding is that it's very much, although it's changed, it's a predominantly rural riding, because it's long. It's the east side of Durham region. It goes up. It did go up as far as Beaverton. It's quite a long ride, quite a rural riding, but it's changing because it's the very eastern edge of the GTA. So it's Aaron has done well. Don't get me wrong, but having lived there, there were, when I lived there, some very true blue Conservatives who would have given the true blue Conservatives here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound a run for their money, if I could say that. Wonderful people, I have to say, just wonderful people. But it will be a very, very interesting time as we go forward. Now, before we get into sort of going forward, what I was going to ask you very briefly is, what do the next 2 weeks hold for you? And then what we're going to do is I want to hear about that, and then we'll take a break and we'll talk about your new role and what is going to happen afterwards. So what do the next 2 weeks hold for you, Alex?
Well, so I just got a few things to finish up. We've got a couple more meetings here over the next couple days, and then I'll be heading back home on Sunday, back to the riding for the week. I do have some caucus meetings at the regional side, from an Ontario side, over in Alliston next week during the middle part of the week. But then I'm basically back in the riding all next week, and then we're back here, and we'll have meetings kicking off, even though Parliament doesn't reconvene until the 23rd. We'll be back. We got meetings already booked in on the 21st. So, there'll be, I think my schedule is going to be fairly busy, working with Mr. Richards and the House leadership team once we get a little bit more fidelity from the government and the other opposition parties, and coming up with sort of what we think Parliament's going to fully look like, and try to get as much of that negotiated ahead of time, so that there's some semblance of agreement going into the way we think things should look and move forward, because ideally, we're there to work for Canadians, and I think everybody, we won't agree on all aspects, but ultimately I think all the parties want to get back to work and get back to the House.
And that's a great segue into what we'll talk about after the break, Alex, because that is really where you are. You're right in the middle of that. But we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Frank! No, Frank, don't carry it. Dribble it! Frank, dribble it! Frank, shoot!
Is this some kind of Canadian joke, sir? I mean, I know you're the instructor and everything, but we can't carry the ball. How can we get a decent shot at the peach basket?
All right. Maybe we can allow a carry of a couple of steps.
And Mr. Naismith, sir, it sure slows things down having to climb up here every time.
Well, then let's cut the bottom out of the basket.
Ah, but I need these baskets back.
100 years after James Naismith from Almont, Ontario invented it, basketball was being played by hundreds of millions of people around the world.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and we're just on the cusp of a new session of Parliament, and we're talking about what Alex has been doing, his new leader, Aaron O'Toole, and of course, we're going to get into what's next. Alex, welcome back.
Thanks again for having me, Dave. It's great to be here.
Now, I hinted at the fact, and we've talked to I've pushed it back a bit, but you've got a brand new role in the House and with the party. If I can describe it, your title is Deputy Opposition Whip, but I thought it was really interesting when Aaron O'Toole released the full document with the shadow cabinet. It's a lovely wall chart. I don't know whether there's a big wall chart version of it, but it's a wall chart. And of course, he's in the center, and below is the shadow cabinet, obviously. But above that is the House of Commons leadership team, and there you are in your position of Deputy Opposition Whip. If I read that correctly, it's kind of like a division between policy and operations. Is that a reasonable way of describing the two teams that he's got in place?
Actually, I think it is a pretty good way to describe it. I never thought of it that way. I mean, I used the word operations myself in sort of describing my role when I was doing an interview, I think, with Bayshore Broadcasting there a week or two, I guess 2 weeks ago now. It's crazy how fast time goes. Actually, no, it was just last week. And that's the way it was described. Like, one of the descriptions was sort of what my role, or really my direct boss, i.e. Blake Richards, as the chief whip, is to sort of be the vice principal of the school, But the other way I look at it, it is that day-to-day operational side of the House for how the House runs. What are those big issues that are going on, and making sure we have the right number of MPs present, that everybody's accounted for, not only in the House. It's in particular important when there's votes going on, And then secondly, in all the committee work that's going on, and that we're aware of that. But I think, what I consider the real privilege, and I'm thankful for Aaron giving me this opportunity, is it just allows me to be that sort of sounding board and a little bit, the frank advice to him. That's the one thing that I've told him from day one. And I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if he would have put me in this position or not. He would have got it from me anyway, right? Because, that's just who I am. And I think we have a history in this riding, both provincially and federally, of having MPs that aren't afraid to, speak up and represent their constituents wholeheartedly. So, but I think you're right. A good way to describe the difference between the two sort of split or division of work or labor within the team is your shadow ministers are focused very much on the policy aspects, looking quite in depth into all their respective counter government's legislation that impacts their specific portfolio, coming up with critique and ways to improve it. But at the same time, working really in reality, what our platform would be or what we think would be a better way to solve the puzzle. Whereas ultimately, we're there to sort of, my role is a bit more involved in the sort of, let's make sure everything's working on a day-to-day basis and stay focused in the way forward.
Yeah, because I see that on the policy side, there's some very familiar names. I mean, Pierre Poilievre is back in finance. Mr. Scheer is also back in the shadow cabinet as infrastructure and communities. But there's other familiar names that Marin Gladue. I'm just looking at some of the ones that I recognize right off the top. Rob Morrison for National Security. The Honourable Peter Kent for Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion. That's another long-time member going back many years. But the operations side is equally interesting because you've got yourself plus Candice Bergen, a very clear Quebec lieutenant in Richard Martel, and it looks like a very, very interesting group to work with. Now, I wanted to ask you, you referred to the number of people, making sure that all the MPs were present and accounted for and were there. But there's also, I understand, and my memory could be wrong, there's an agreement that you may be responsible for between the parties that, for example, if someone has to be away because they're sick or family emergency, there's a balance so that is there a correlation between if you have one that's on that has to be away or someone else there's an equality
pairing. It's called pairing.
Parity, yes.
And so there's something unofficially that way. There's no current official agreements. That's the one thing when you prorogue. Everything gets thrown in the garbage. That's the one thing I don't know if all Canadians understand fully is that when the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament, even every single one of pieces of their introduced legislation go back to square one. All the committees stopped, and so a lot of progress got thrown in the trash bin when the government was prorogued. And so, but that includes sort of the agreements that we had for hybrid sittings, the agreement for reduced representation in the House, and even something like pairing. So there that is a policy or a procedure or practice, I guess is a better word, that has been used historically. It still is normally used. It's normally initiated more at the bequest of the government, not the opposition parties. And it's the government asking to do that when they have to have a minister travel or something like that, because obviously, and then what they'll do then, especially if there's a shadow minister, let's just take defense, for example. If you look historically over the last few years with Minister Sajan, who's been the minister since the Liberals formed government, and James Bazan, who's been the defense shadow minister, a lot of the time when the minister travels, if the situation allows, he will take the shadow ministers from the opposition parties with them. So James sometimes travels with them, and you provide that thing. And at the same time, it protects the sort of integrity of the election results, because if not, if the government takes too many of their people away, it could lead to them getting defeated in the House.
And I believe that the government, not this government, we're going back probably 40 or 50 years. That has happened. It's been very, very close, and governments have been brought down.
Yeah. No government's been brought down recently that I'm aware, but there have, because they weren't confidence votes. When they're confidence votes, normally there's a lot more detail or attention to detail put into it. However, there have been votes in both the previous Conservative government and even in the previous session, from my understanding, that didn't go the way of the government of the day because of somebody messed up a little bit, right? Or it resulted in, it got interesting, to say the least, apparently. So that'll be part of to stay on top of that. And again, the unique challenge that we have right now is at the same time holding and making sure we're following through once an agreement is struck between the different parties, that you don't have too many people in there. And again, that's where it really gets tricky, because when you talk about, about a lot of MPs, regardless of party affiliation, that they're there to represent their constituents, and there's a lot of pressure from their constituents, as I said, regardless of what party they're there, the banner that they're under, to be there, and their constituents expect them to be there. But when you are, for health reasons, like right now, or over the last number of months, that you've agreed to a reduced number, you have to find that fine balance. And some MPs, it's their privilege to be in the House. Like, it doesn't really matter what agreement there is. The House of Commons is a unique spot, and as an MP, you have been bestowed some very unique privileges, and nobody can stop you from being there, kind of deal. So the challenge is to work that and make people understand, not make them, encourage them to understand, the reasons why and the complexity. And again, to allow in the case now, Blake Richards, that, if he's the one that's made that agreement with the other parties, to be a person of his word and to respect that. And so, it's all about teamwork and working together. And I think that's the key thing that you'll see. And that's as I said earlier, what's most impressed me is just how quickly our whole team's very, very focused and unified on doing what's best for Canadians and getting refocused after the sort of the internal competition, for lack of better words, to now focus back on what Canadians elected us to do.
I suspect, Alex, you're going to find it's probably as complicated, if not more complicated, than having oversight and leadership of a battalion of troops.
Well, it's a lot more nuanced for certain, and again, we have a chain of command within the Canadian Armed Forces, right, or within a battalion. So when you're the CO, I can remember it was a brand new second lieutenant up in 3 RCR, and the CO, for lack of better words, we thought he was God almost, right? Because what he said went, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense at all. They were just it was impressive to see, and that's the way that the chain of command functions. We have a semi chain of command, I guess you could say, within a political party. However, ultimately, we're all there, and the people that we all work for is the people that elected us and our constituents. So ultimately, that's where it's a lot more nuanced, and you have to balance those sometimes competing interests, depending on the issue, right? Because there's some issues that are very regionally focused, and just because it's maybe something in a case in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound that, hey, we really want to see this go forward, yet maybe it's not the best thing for Canada. It might be the best thing for our area of the country, but it's not necessarily the best thing, and that's always the fine balance. And then if that is the case, for an example that impacted us, then that's my job to explain to the constituents of the riding, to say, here's why this decision was made, or here's why we voted the way we voted, or I voted the way I voted. And ultimately, I have no issues. It's called being accountable. I challenge you. I challenge all the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound to hold me to account. I'm a big believer in doing what you say you're going to do, and at the same time, the responsibility fully stops with me, right? I'm the one that was elected, and I have no problem accepting that responsibility and being held to account for it.
One of the things you said earlier was the impact of COVID-19 on the community. Impact of COVID-19, it's obviously on the House of Commons. It's caused a huge amount of change in the way you do things. But stepping forward as the House comes back in a couple of weeks, do you think that we will see changes, not just operational changes in the way House does things, but will there be lessons learned? Do you think the government will be introducing policies? Do you think that there will be some changes that will be maybe in the throne speech that we'll all be waiting upon with bated breath?
Well, that's the $1 million question, really, right? Is what is going to be in that throne speech? I think we've seen some trial balloons released by the government already. That's been, either leaked to the media, and some of the stories that have been running, just how big of a deficit, are they going to run going forward? The $100 billion more dollars have been bandied around. That could be them just saying, hey, we're going to spend this much. This is how much more money we're going to run, and then when it comes out, this speech from the throne may only have $40 billion additional spending. So, and then it'll be like, oh, all right, see, it can't be that. It's not that bad. We're only spending another $40 billion. On top of the $343 billion that's already been spent this year. So I have no idea, what it's going to be and exactly what it's going to look like. I think it wouldn't be fair to, determine, whether or not there's going to be some. My assumption there should be some great stuff in there. My other assumption is there's going to be some parts in there that philosophically I will be personally opposed to, and that my party will be opposed to. But to be fair to them, let's wait and see what they put forth. There's still a few weeks, a couple weeks at least here before that's going to be released. And again, as Aaron's clearly stated, I mean, that's the job. We're there to work for Canadians and make the best legislation go forward. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of policies they bring forward and what they're looking to do. Well,
some would say that the WE scandal forced Bill Morneau out of cabinet, and he won't run again. He has said he has resigned, I believe, as an MP. So some would say that that's going to be a change, and Chrystia Freeland is the new Minister of Finance, and although she's a respected scholar and author and journalist. It'll be interesting to see what her proposals are coming forward.
No, absolutely. As you said, she's, to give her credit, she's obviously hasn't been tarnished with the same brush as some of these scandals. Although, interesting enough, when you mentioned the WE scandal, she was chairing the cabinet committee, the special COVID, government committee. That made the decisions on awarding that contract to the WE Charity Foundation, which was that new third organization of WE that was stood up with that. So again, I think that's, personally, that's what bothers me a little bit, is some of the hypocrisy that's come out of the government. Hey, kudos to them when they won in 2015 on running on being an open, transparent government that will never, ever prorogue Parliament. And again, fascinating enough, 5 years later, they've done that when, as I said, if they needed a new throne speech, I'm not, as I said, an expert on whether or not you actually need to prorogue to call a new throne speech. But even if you do have to go through that method in order to do it, they could have done that on the 21st of September, prorogued it for 48 hours, and had us all back on the 23rd. So I don't quite buy the sandwich that they've been feeding us, over the last few weeks.
Well, the British parliamentary system is they are, of course, we both are Westminster systems, but when the House is prorogued in England, it is only for a week, and you come back with a speech. Canada has always had a longer term for whatever reason, and I haven't done any delving into it, but we do have a practice of a longer term for for proroguing the Parliament. And, one way or the other, we'll get something new, and people will have a choice.
Well, I don't know if they'll have a choice. I mean, proroguing Parliament doesn't mean that there's going to be a federal election. I mean, I'm hopeful that there's not, right? Because I don't think right now there's too many unknowns. And as much as I fundamentally am not super happy with the current leadership of the government, I don't think that should be what we should be focused on right now. We should be focused on Canadians and bringing forth the best legislation possible. And so, interesting enough to, on proroguing, it was this current government that brought forth, in the previous session, brought forth the necessity for them to actually, within, I think, 20 sitting days, to provide a written explanation to Canadians publicly why they prorogue Parliament. I'm pretty sure it's public. I know it has to come to the House anyway, but I'm pretty sure it's a public document as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they rationalize why it was necessary to prorogue. So, and as you said, we'll see what they come. I mean, you can't. I agree that the situation's fundamentally changed from the election last fall, and so refocusing is absolutely possible. I just think there was lots of ways they could have done that without necessarily proroguing. And it was even more frustrating when 2 days after they prorogued, they brought forth another $37 billion worth of legislation to help Canadians that they've now can't introduce because they prorogued until after we reconvene and kind of go through this other that. And meanwhile, some of the benefits that are tied to that new legislation and tied to CERB, tied to this new, I think, Canadian or Canada recovery benefit and enhanced EI, is that they can't, the current suite of programs ends at the end of September, so they're not even going to be able to technically get it through. So it's, to me, it's a little bit like almost threatening us opposition parties to say, hey, if you need to do this, otherwise this legislation won't go through, because if we fall and we got to go to the election, none of that will get passed, because obviously Parliament will be dissolved. So, I've never been a big fan, regardless of who's in government, of the political games. Let's just focus on doing our best to support and represent Canadians.
I share your lack of desire for a December election, or a November or December election. That's and particularly in the midst of a pandemic. That's we will see what happens. We may end up there, but winter elections, having been through a few over the years, they're no fun at all. And we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, Alex. So you're going back to the House. You'll be back in the House a few days before, in Ottawa, a few days before the House reconvenes. And you'll be going through the ceremony of the speech from the throne and all that pomp and circumstance and stuff. And you all wear your best bib and tucker, and the Supreme Court justices wear their ermine robes, and the Governor General does her thing, and away we go.
It's going to be fascinating to see what it looks like in this COVID environment, because obviously, unlike the throne speech last October or November, I guess, whenever it was, I guess it was November before it was actually delivered. We were all jammed in there. I mean, not everybody could even fit because of obviously the Senate being in a temporary new location as well. So it just wasn't, I was jammed in the back corner, kind of deal in behind, not even in the actual Senate chamber. So you could kind of watch it. You were there, but, whereas now I think the vast majority of it will be done with a very reduced representation from the House of Commons side of the House. And we'll see how it all plays out, right? So yeah, that's lots more to be sort of figured out and within the respective administration staffs of both the House of Commons and the Senate.
Yes, and it will be, and what shall I say, not just an important moment in history, it'll be an important moment just in Parliament, simply because we've never been in COVID before. This is all a new way of being government. And for yourself as whip, you've got not just the traditional and historic role of the whip, but you've also got, as part of the operations team, how do you navigate the House in this very different time? It'll be interesting to see what changes both the government proposes as a result of COVID and what things actually get passed, because that'll be what everyone will be watching.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Alex. So you said you'll be in the riding just for about a week or so, and so I presume that if people want to reach out to you, they can contact you through your constituency office and set up an appointment. Are you finding that you're able to do more work by Zoom now? Are you able to talk to constituents using various teleconferencing software like we're using?
For the groups, right? The Chamber of Commerce's, the beef farmers, any of those type municipalities. I'm fortunate enough. I listen in and more as just to listen to get a feel for it with the regional sort of, I think it's Grey County sort of chairs it, Recovery Task Force, and some of the different groups that do that. So that's where, if it's a group meeting, definitely using a lot more. But when it comes to individual one-on-one, the vast majority hasn't really changed. It's still majority sort of either email or personal phone calls. And there are the occasional person that wants to come in, and we do face-to-face. As I said, we set up the office, and it's big enough that we can keep our distance, wear a mask, and have that safe conversation, interaction. And the staff are all set up, so we're only one constituent into the office at a time. We spray her down before the next constituent is coming in. So we've got all those measures put in place, and I'm hopeful. I mean, it's one of the questions I'm actually going to follow up here with the government and Service Canada is something I've been asking for a while now, including I think the very first time I was in the House in April, and I recognized how do we help out those Canadians that have limited internet and limited phone access, and in the most vulnerable in a lot of cases that can't afford to sit on hold for days on end because they only have a cell phone and they have limited minutes and they can't be on hold. I said, what is their plan to reopen Service Canada offices for, and in a safe manner? And I think the last time I stood up in June was I even volunteered to help them. I'll go put in their plexiglass for them if they want me to. It's not that hard to put in that stuff.
We've got to go, but I wanted to thank you again for your time today on Politically Speaking, and we'll be talking again. Hopefully, best wishes in the next session of Parliament.
Thanks so much, David.
And thank you, friends. I'm David Shearman. My guest has been Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Take care. We'll talk to you again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Is fine spending $400 on footballs, but not with sending